Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. I am Ahmed Lamayar. In this few videos, I will cover the IBM Integration Bus IIB exception handling and testing and debugging. So I will under Java Compute Note exception, and also I will under the SQL programming language exception and testing and debugging. At the same time, I will use the IntelliJ with it, so that way you will compare it once I using right here. The reason I'm using right here, once I run the program right away with the less time consumed, you will see the result right here. So if there is a problem, this the right away this print a problem right here for you. We need to fix it. And also right here you could see it, and if you compare it with the IBM, there is a, because they're using graphical, we will find where the exception occur, how we catch it. So we will cover both the compute ESQL programming language exception and Java. So first, what is exception? I'm sure you will understand exception is the message that communicate information about the program on the system, like the failure case, like the action has not gone as we planned it. For example, like exception happen when something goes wrong, like we try to open a file but it does not exist, like you got an exception. We are attempting to call a method on an object but variable was null, so they causing the exception. So exception is a message that communicate information about something happen, some problem happen in the system. So we have a framework for that. The exception framework, like all the data above the problem, so that can be sent or somewhere the application. So when the exception happen, they will create an object from it, like exception object. It has a producer and receiver. Producer is encoding a problem, the method, and creating the exception, like producer that create the exception, the object to represent the problem, and receiver that there's a special code to interact the exception object and respond to a problem. For example, let's go to IntelliJ and we want to write a simple code. So the code is, let's say we want to write a code, we want to echo the text file back. Say enter the text to echo, like we asking a user enter the text that we replay back for you, like we display back for you. So right here I want to use the input streamer that come from the Java IO package, and if you want to read, you could read more. My input, I will name it, and I want to create the object for that inputs, and the asking where the data we getting from. We will get it from a system, like whatever user put it in, we will get it from system in. So once we put it, we want to use the buffer right here, buffer, and does also come from the IO message. I will say my buff something might be an equal to new, because we using we were creating a buff. We will pass the whatever data that come from or get on the system, we pass it to our buffer reader. And what we do, we will assign it to a variable. So once we assign it my data, I will name it and my data. So what I will do, say my b dot, I want to call method read line. What that coming from? That come from a buffer classes, and read line is a method. Once I call them, like I didn't do anything wrong, there's a no code problem, but still they're giving me a red line, like there's something there is a problem with it. Let's say I want to end, like when I run it, see right away they give me the exception, like we didn't handle the exception, and the exception is the IO exception. So what it's telling me, you need to cover that one, because there's a scenario, probably the user put it empty, not to enter anything. So we need to cover this scenario. So I mean, there is a bunch of assumption that we have to make it, like if something going like it is going to be like properly read the input we when we call the read line method. So we could assume that the keyboard is functional fine, but there is a would be a scenario where the user would put nothing in it. So how should we cover it? And also, if you click on that, because let not make you confused, because of the read line, also they're using a throw exception. Like why they just like a put throw exception, what they're telling me, whoever using this method, they need to cover their exception. So that's why they're giving me this exception. So for this reason, we don't have option. Once you don't have option, we need to cover that. On this case, we covering on two ways. If you go back, let's go back right here. We have a two choice to handle the exception. Like one way to using try and catch block, and the second way we could use the handle and declare exception. Let's use the try and catch block way. That way is easy. If you click right here, surrounding with a try catch, they give you the option, or you just write it. So you see, we just add what the piece of code to a try. We will try it. If there's an exception, we will catch it. But we will not through the runtime exception. We will say e.print start trace. This is working fine. We will use that one. Like if there's an exception, we will cover it. So let's focus a little bit more. If you at the beginning I say we have a framework because they're creating exception object for it. This exception object has a producer and receiver. What is a producer and what is a receiver? If you check right here, you could tell this is a producer. When you try using that one, because this one may cause to produce the exception. That's why the try block is like a producer, they creating exception, and the receiver is a catch block, like receiver exception that we covered with the code, whatever code we have. So this is the one we are covering, and the object it get creating, and we will read more about the object, what property it has. So from right here, the object get creating, and they're telling you the objects, the problem that can be sent some errors and application. There's all the data above the problem. Like you say, there's a object, like the exception object is a message that all the information above the problem. So right now you see there's a producer. This is the receiver. Producer that create a problem, which there's a chance the problem would get created, and the receiver will catch it. So that way, this is the framework for it. So this is the one way you cover it, the exception. If you don't want to cover it right here, you want to pass this. Let's say, like if you know it, you wanna there was the one way to cover the message. You need to cover all the exception right here, and this is the right way. This is the good practicing. When you see the exception, you need to cover it. But if there is a chance you may not have enough information about the exception, you will use a different method. You will pass it to another application. Let's say, for example, the read line. If you use the just use the control and click on that, what they done, they could cover the exception right here. What they done, they said, look, I don't want to cover it right here. We don't have enough information. What would be the problem? Let the user decide how they cover it. So that's why they use the throw exception. So that way right here, it does not cause any issue. Let we decide, like whoever using this method, they need to cover the exception. Right here we cover the exception. So we could do the same thing, whatever they done it, just and go back to your method, because it's our method right here. What we do, we will use the same thing, through exception, IO exception you could call them, and everything would be covered. so we don't have it anymore. And we just let like whoever using our method, this method, main method, they need to cover their exception. But since we could assume, because it's very clear, we could assume some exception, we could assume, because this may cause a problem, there would be a null value, some empty case, or another scenario. So that way we need to use TryCatch block, not to leave it for other one. So this is the two way: either use TryCatch block to cover it, or use through exception, through signature exception. So since we have like a general perspective on what is the exception, so let's focus right now about the exception ranking, like ranking classes. In a Java like on a Java, it categorizes all the exception according to their ancestor. Like throwable, we have throwable is a specified a common thread of anything that represents the problem within code that can be transmitted through the Java application using the exception propagation mechanism. And the throwable has two important subclasses, exception and error. Both of these classes represent the major subcategory on a Java exception handling. There are a number of the subclasses for each branch that represents specific kind of exception and error type. So if you come right here, we have a exception that represent potential recovery and predictable problem. Like exception is something is a potential recovery predictable problem. We could assume something gonna go wrong, like I said in the file, there's a chance there would be no file. We could assume that. So this is a predictable file. Whatever we could predict, we call them exception. So that's why they name it exception. With an application, according to a Java API application, they indicate a condition that a reasonable application might win to catch. Generally speaking, most exceptions represent the problem at like there will be a moderate, mild, like there is a level of thing like mild to moderate and severity like. And also an error on the other hand represents more serious problem on a running application like Java application. You could read more about error, but the subclass of throwable that indicate the serious problem that maybe reasonable application should not try to catch. Most such error or abnormal condition like out of memory. This is the error, like something went wrong, there's not enough memory. What I'm trying to tell you, like they would be not related to a code, just related to a virtual machine. There's something wrong with the computer do not have enough memory. So like out of memory, something like that. And also the exception has a subclasses. I just named one of them, runtime, but there's too many. You could Google it or just find out about the subclass of the exception, but there is many subclasses in an exception. But the runtime and subclass represent the exception that can be occurred due to the normal operation of the Java virtual machine. Example, you will result on a runtime exception would be trying to use a null value object reference, null point exception, dividing number by 0. There is a chance there would be automatic exception and they will cause automatic exception. And also as you try to like using array, like there is a chance you might like user would try to access out of boundary exception because there is not a data that a user tried to accept. Because on the array would be 1 and 2 data, they try to, but the user tried to access it data number 4. We don't have it, that would cause out of boundary exception. So if you let's go back to and also if you check the throwable classes, that has a property, has a 3 field on that: message, stack trace, and causes. So Java has a class of exception extend throwable, and throwable extend, and there's an interface of serialization. Remember, So and that variable has a property has a message, stack trace, and causes. Like once again, it is a self I mean, you could understand what is the message, what is stack trace, but still the message is provide more detailed description about the problem associated with the exception, and the stack trace is provide the record the stack associated with the exception, and we have a cause, the property is newly introduced. This is like a introduced on Java truth, the causes. And let's go back to Java. If you go back to like IntelliJ, right here we're using a through. Let's delete that one. Let's use the let's use the surround try and catch block. And because I'm sure you will know the rule of the try and catch block, but still I would say, like, whenever using a try block, you must always follow by a catch or final, because there's a one option, another option, final. Either you're using this final as well. Once you're using that one, you must follow with either catch or try. A final block. A try block may have both catch and finally, but must have at least one of them. Must at least one. When using a try, you must at least one of this one, either catch or final. And another rule, the order of the block is enforced. If you code has using a, like if you're using a try and we're using a catch, we're using a final, this order must be followed. You cannot put final at the right here instead of catch. We need to follow this order. Using a try, after that is catch, then final. You cannot doing that. But if you don't want to use catch block, then you could use the final block. The final block is like when we try this code, then we catch it right here. After catch, doesn't matter whatever happened right here, the final block will be run. Like let's say let's use the sysout. I say I am done. Whatever happened, they will say this would final block would run. Like whatever code you put it right here, doesn't matter what the result would be from right here, the final code will be run. See, let's I run it. Let's say I wanna read. I will say read. See, I am done. Doesn't matter what happened, still they're telling me I'm done. Because we want to echo it, let's echo that one. This my data. See, I'm done. Whatever happened, whatever result happened, the final block would run. So what I'm trying to say, like final block will always be executed to completion, like exception on the following situation node, but still it will execute. Just I want to provide you a little bit more information so you will get familiar with all exception. If you check this exception, just press Ctrl, then click. You see we have a class exception. On this exception, what it does, they extend the exception class. If you click on that and you see the exception also extend. You see, this is the like ranking, this is like a this is the child of variable classes, you could tell them on a ranking wise. See, and whatever it is right here, the property using right here, like, because it is like a inheriting. I'm sure you know about inheriting. If you click on right here, and they also implement there's interface, they call them serializable. You could check that one if they could, but they don't extend anything. They just an interface, there's nothing in that. So this is a hierarchy. If you check the property of that is object trace and string detail message, you could check the property what it has. It has a message Let's go back to exception. If you check the exception and the property, you could check super whatever it is, it come from and we're using a message, the one property, and there is a message and cause. There's a different constructor, you could read about it. Just like get familiar, go right here, what is exists right here, you will get familiar. You could use any of this one, you see, you could use any of this constructor, there's nothing wrong with it. This is the property, message, cause and stack trace. You could find it, just look for it. So the question is when to handle the exception, because if you go back again right here, there is a two way to handle exception, using a try and catch block or use the handle or declare option. I just show you both way how you deal with it, either using method signature, you pass it, or you just using try and catch block. So when we decide to use try and catch block, when we decide to use the throw method signature. So like basically like method should only pass the exception to a caller when it does not have information or context or resource to deal with the problem or with the exception at own. Once you don't have enough information, so you just need to use throw signature. You just click right here and use with the method throw signature. All you do that, you just pass the information, whoever using your application, they will have enough information to cover the exception. Once you do not have the enough information to deal with the exception, you just using a throw exception, just say throw exception. But once you have enough information to deal with the exception, for example file, for example this one, you need to cover it. You don't need to pass it like they done it right here. Like if you click right here, they're using a TryCatch. They left it for us. They don't have enough information probably. They just give this kind of, they're using this one, like whoever using this method, they need to cover this exception. They all basically all they does, but they do not cover it by itself. So right here we cover it. But same thing, if you do not have enough information, use that one. If you have enough information and deal with exception, do not leave it empty. And there's a good practice, use try and catch block. So where in IBM we see and try and catch block, how we do on a IBM? If you come back on an IBM, we have a filler, we have a catch, we have a timeout. This is the terminal. This try and catch work as a filler. And also if you go back on a version 12, if you come right here, they give you like arrow handling. You see arrow handling? Once you click, there is a few options. You will use one of this one, which is similar whatever you're using on Java with the code. Right here is a graphic. Let's say you want to use that one, use TryCatch. You could use it right here somewhere on a middle on one. Then catch, try it. Let's say you just say using it. First time it would go right here, try it. If something goes wrong, then throw the exception. You could like cover your scenario. This just doesn't make sense right now. I put it wrong way. But you could use it on like try and catch using on a middle or somewhere. Right here using it. After that, once you try it, you will have another node. You would have another node to cover it. Something like compute node, you might use it, or Java node, you might use it. Whatever it is. Then after that, you cover your exception. It would go to the code you creating it. Then after that, if you want to replay it, you could replay back to the you could using that one, but it's not necessary using that one, because IBM has try and catch block. Like whenever it's coming right here, it work as a try. But if the exception happen, you don't have this one. Let's say you don't have this one, and if an exception happens somewhere right here, What is this? This work as a try. Then there is a catch terminal. Just connect it right here. Then exception would come right here. They will create an object for you. You click right here and cover it. Do your code a business logic and cover it. We will cover it, a few of them. You could go to this link if you want to see the structure of exception. The tree, like an IBM, they have a exception list. They have a recovery exception. On recovery exception, there's a subclass for that. Like all type of exception, they have it. You could come and read more about it. They have fiddle exception, recovery exception, configuring exception, security exception, parser exception, conversion, database exception, user exception, like all type of exception. You could come and read right here. They call them exception list tree structure. You could on IBM. You could come and read it right here. So you will have more information about. And also I have a video about trace, how to use it. Go there and watch it. And also right here we will cover catch and try back a lot, and through block. You use either graphic right here, graphically, and through your master, through your exception. If something went wrong, let's say if you want to divide 1 by 0, there's a problem with 1 is not dividing by 0. You want to through exception. You could use the graphic right here, or use right away code inside on a Java using a throw user exception. Same way you could do it. On validation, I have a video. You could watch my previous video. Go back to my YouTube channel. You could watch it about this node. This all is error handling nodes. You could use one of this node and trace to lock your message. There's different way to lock your message. So the reason. Okay, let's go back to a note that I have. And one more concept, check and uncheck exception. What does that mean? Let me make it so simple. Check means when you have an option. Check means when you have don't have an option to ignore the exception. Right here we don't have the option to ignore exception. We need to cover it. And then they call them check exception. When you don't have no option, like let's say you have option either cover it, not cover it, and a runtime exception. They call them this is a runtime. I put them a runtime exception, so let's call them uncheck exception. Once you don't have an option to cover it, it call them runtime exception. But when you don't have an option, they call them check exception. This is a check exception because file is also like checking file. There's a chance there's a no file, so this is a file exception for. And let me put it back. Let's delete this one back. See, this is the check except. What happened? Why I copied that one? I wanna take this one. This need to be covered. This call them a check exception. But once you have option not to cover it, they call them uncheck exception. And uncheck exception is runtime exception. Anything is a runtime exception, you find to go. So that's why we will cover more about the check and uncheck. But just know it, like when you do not have option to ignore, they call them check exception. Once you have option to ignore it, they call them runtime exception. And there is a chance you could argue like runtime is also there is a problem with a cure, and we could assume it, and you need to cover the exception. That is true. You could argue and you have a point to say, but they already divided runtime exception and exception, and the exception that is we need to cover them, they call them check exception. The exception that's not to cover them at the same time, they call them uncheck exception. So the standard exception, like we could handle the exception in Java, like we could do it like 9 different way, like log the exception and ask the user for the input. The second way, like use the default value. We could use the default value, forward the control to another part of the application, or convert the exception to another form, ignore the problem, or retry the action, or take alternative recovery action, or prepare a system for the shutdown. First, let's cover the log exception. Unlock exception, we have three different way to log the exception. Log to the standard output or the standard error stream. We will use the this is a basic one. You just said system.out.println. Let's say, for example, go back to right here. The first one is a basic. What we just click, this is a just click and surround it, and right here all you do, there's a either you using a system sys. When you say sys, I said no empty line. You just said right here no empty line. If something happened, you just cover it. This is the first way to handle the exception. They call them a standard output or the standard error stream. You could stream it right away right here, or just run it. If something happened to a code, they give you right away something. If not, then you're good to go. And also you could say like I believe arrow. Yeah, you could use the arrow right now. Like whenever it happens, they will give you a red color. You see, instead of out, you could use the arrow. This is the first way you cover the logging. Let's use the custom. Use the custom logging. Let's use the file as well with it. So if there is a problem, we will cover it. So let's create the next video. That way we're creating a custom logging. So custom logging, we don't wanna use the API. We wanna create our own code for the custom logging. On a custom logging, we will move that custom logging code, the Java code, to the compute code, and we will use it with the ESQL code. Like we will mix it up. We will write it on an IntelliJ. You could write it right here. It's the same Java. We could write it right here, and we will mix it with the ESQL code, and we're gonna log it up. That's how we will do it, the custom logging. See you on the next video.